friends, welcome to Starting Line Church. We are so glad that you have joined us today, wherever you are, whatever time you're watching. We're excited that you have joined us as we are in the last week of our Possessing the Promise series that's been all about the book of Joshua. And in this book, over the last series of weeks, we've been seeing the nation of Israel's journey into the Promised Land. The Israelites spent years in slavery in Egypt, decades wandering in the wilderness, and now years conquering the land that God promised them long ago. We started this series all the way back on October 8th, which means it's been a long series. There has been a lot happening. So we want to take really today to recap the last 7 weeks. Not because we couldn't think of anything better. We really want to review all of this time, all of the things that we talked about, so we can see how all these weeks go together to create a larger and continuous story. Because that's what it is. In week 1, we're going to start there. In week 1, we start at the beginning of the book of Joshua, where Joshua takes Moses' place as Israel's leader. Moses is not the one who leads the Israelites into the promised land, into this place, this new season. God appoints Joshua to be the person. And this wasn't a quick decision. It wasn't a random hire. Joshua had spent his entire career as Moses' assistant. He saw how he did things. He knew the culture. He had already been learning from Moses as he was in very close relationship with him for a very long time. So Joshua, he's appointed as the new leader with fresh eyes and new ideas, and he's ready to lead the nation of millions of people into the promised land. And in this week, we talked about God's encouragement to him as he stepped into this new role, which was be strong and courageous and follow God's word. God called him to be a leader who relies on strength and courage and one who follows after God's voice and instruction. Then in week 2, we move into chapter 2, where the spies are sent to Jericho. And they're sent there because this is the first city that they were set to conquer. They would be attacking a heavily guarded and protected city. So Joshua, he needed strategic information for the upcoming battle. And so the spies, they go, and when they get there, they stopped at a woman's house named Rahab for the night. But someone in Jericho finds out that the spies are there, so the king sends people to capture them. But Rahab, in great faith in a God she barely knew, hid the spies from the authorities and spared their lives. And we get to witness this bold faith from a person who we would never expect and who risked everything to do the right thing. And so because of that faith, we then watch Rahab step into new life, the new life that God has for her, because her present no longer looked like her past. We asked ourselves this question, like, what can we learn from Rahab's faith? Then in week 3, the spies they're sent that were in Jericho were sent back. They return, and the plan was now for the whole nation of Israel to go defeat Jericho. But as they are on their way, they come to the Jordan River that is high and deep, and they don't know how they're going to get across. Well, the Lord, he tells Joshua to command the priests to go into the river, to take a few steps into the river, and then stop there. And we see how crazy this is because, like, taking 2 steps into the river and stopping, what's that going to do? So in this moment, God asked Joshua, hey, trust me without an 100% satisfaction guarantee. And even though Joshua is blind to the outcome, he does it because he trusts in his God. And so we read that as soon as their feet hit the waters of the Jordan, God parted it into, and millions of people walked through on a dry riverbed. It's this incredible miracle that God does, just like when they were leaving Egypt and God parted the Red Sea for the same nation to walk through. He did the same miracle again, and we were reminded that God proves who he is and what he's already done. In week 4, it's a direct continuation of this moment. We see what happens after God parts the Jordan River for the Israelites to cross through. When they step out of the dry riverbed, it was the moment where they had finally reached the promised land. This is the mark. This is it. This is what they've been waiting for. And in Joshua chapter 4, God commands the Israelites to go take 12 stones out of the river and carry them as proof, as a mark, as a sign of God and who he is, and a reminder of what he did in that place. He tells them to pick up the exact stones that were physically part of the miracle that he just performed, so they would never forget what he did. If you were with us in person that week, we took physical stones with us that day as a reminder and to hold on to in the difficulty ahead. And we were reminded to remember what God has done and to testify to what God has done. In week 5, we talked about when the Israelites came up against the city of Jericho. They finally crossed the Jordan River. They get to Jericho, and when they did, they had a choice to make in how they overcame it. The sound military strategy probably wouldn't have been to walk around the city walls for 7 days straight, but that's what God told them to do to conquer it. So they did. And no matter how silly it may have seemed, they followed through with it. So we talked about how in our lives, we can either try to do it according to what we want or the way we think is best or how other people tell us to deal with it, or we can choose to humble ourselves before God, obey what he asks us to do, and move forward in confidence. When faced with obstacles, we have a choice to make in how we overcome it. In week 6, we move from Joshua chapter 6 all the way to Joshua chapter 13. And in between those chapters, Joshua, he's displayed brilliant military strategy in conquering the land of Canaan. And the Israelites, they've conquered so much of the area. 31 kings and cities had been defeated. So from our perspective, things are looking really good. But at the beginning of Joshua chapter 13, we read a long list of names and places that was yet to be conquered. The land of Canaan belonged to the nation of Israel. They had been in possession of the promised land, but the job wasn't totally finished. The problem was that they hadn't conquered all the land. And when we related that back to our life, we realized that thriving happens when we conquer our lands. And we were encouraged to think about what are our unconquered lands. What has God asked you to conquer, deal with, do that you haven't yet? Because if we don't conquer them, we will be living a life of survival and not one of thriving. Then last week, in week 7, we talked about Joshua's farewell speech to the Israelites. His final words, his final instruction for them. And in this speech, we see him give them 2 decisions about choices to make. Serve God faithfully and invest in each other faithfully. Joshua encourages them to serve God faithfully in our lives, to be strong and obey God, to not be influenced by the evil and idols that came with the Canaanites, and then to invest in each other faithfully and regularly. Both of these things, Joshua has one last thing to say to them, and it's about valuing his relationship with God and others. He says, if you're gonna hear one thing, hear the value of relationship with God and others. We realize there's been so much that we've gone through over the last 7 weeks. So we want to take today, not just to review all of this information, but to pause, to reflect, to respond on what we can take away, on what we can hold on to. And my prayer is that we would find something that God showed us or spoke to us in this series and hold on to it, because we never know what's coming next. in our lives. So as you leave here, as you go, as you move on with your week, pause, reflect on this series, and ask the Lord to reveal something to you that can help you in the future. We'll see you next week.